How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Alberto Gonzalez here again, looking right now at the component testing, which is a model from this enterprise UI development. This is a course taught by Steve Kinney, head front-end engineer at Temporal, right? So the TLDR of this course is to understand what are the way of how can we maintain large code, sorry, large code bases with a wide range of contributors over a long period of time with multiple teams. So this slowly makes sense, especially if you want to actually, or if you are the owner of a particular code base, or you are responsible for that code base, right? Um, and then you want to now set up the infrastructure needed to make this code base last long as much as possible with all of these different teams with a wide range of contributors collaborating to this code, right? So again, this is a very interesting practice, especially as software engineers, when we need to actually is not only be able and responsible to design the system, but also to maintain. This is the two sides of the same coin. Now, because I don't want to dive deep into all of this terminology and concepts that we went through, I just want to briefly describe this as a way to say, hey, now to understand what are the basic installation needed to actually lay down the foundation of how can we make our code maintainable, which is we can quickly add or change or do a refactor or migrate without the fear of breaking something. Okay, so well, we need to actually put in place is the testing system, the build systems, as well as the static analysis. And then on top of that, all right, then you define some of the process, the how to, which is, hey, code review or the design documents, the blueprints, and on top of that, you're going to develop some patterns based on those how to, based on those process. That anytime that you have to get into this sort of process, you realize that there is a recurring things happen there, right? And then you come up with some pattern, come up with some solution to a typical problem. So we have now is the architecture, all right, especially for writing or React applications, or Vue applications, or Next applications, or for backend applications, all right. What is the architecture that we're gonna use here, as well as the abstraction needed, okay, as a way to make your code much more modular and easy to test and debug, which is one of the topic that we're gonna talk about here in the component testing. And I'm glad that I make this quick recap out of this. Another patterns is the state management. How we gonna manage our state for that in our front end or back end application. So because this is the particular diagram that I'm talking to as a way to now have a mental model and a mental image of what are the things that we need to develop, that we need to put in place, what are the legal pieces to actually towards to that particular goal based on our needs, in this case to make our code maintainable, right? So again, this will be a very quick recap of all of this. So we look at the spectrum between the tests. So you have now unit testing and the E2E, and on the middle you have now component testing, which is something that we're going to talk about in today's video. And how can we now do the unit testing? What are what are the things that we actually testing in our unit is just functions in JavaScript, because this is the tool that we're gonna use here. We're gonna use this JavaScript, React, TypeScript, VTest, library, testing library, as well as Playwright. Okay, so for the unit testing here, let me actually show you quickly is that diagram. Okay, so we have now the unit testing. Okay, this is focuses on these are lightning fast tests, because it focuses on the on the functionality, not the implementation. And you have in the middle the component test, as well as the end-to-end, which is much more expensive and slow, because you need to actually simulate is like if our real users are going to now interact with our app, right? So it means that there's a lot of infrastructure that we don't own. For example, is the OS in which the browser is running, Mac, Windows, Linux, or as well as the browser. It can be Firefox, Chrome, Safari, or any of these other more hipster frameworks like Brave and Vivaldi, right? Or you can say, hey, let's go to, and also you need to check for network connectivity. Hey, is this user is now on a 2G or 3G or 4G, and recently now 5G, you know, or is on edge. Most people in the US, they don't know what edge means, but it's a real thing outside of the borders. Anyway, and people that live in third world countries, India, Ukraine, or even some part of the Eastern Asia or Southeast Asia, Philippines, Latin in general, some part of Africa. Okay. And how can we make our unit testing using VTest? What are the things that we actually test most of the time? And the most common or the way of how we can set up our test, the way we can set up our tests to develop this practice needed when it comes to describe is all of this tests, right? In a way that is much more easy to test and understand what's going on. Because most of the time we don't want to actually write tests, one, and second, we don't want is to actually write tests that test our tests. So the best practice here is to write your test and put everything at a glance. Okay, so if you need to actually handle some asynchronous operations, we also look at how can we do that, and then how can we deploy our tests to our code base, whether it is on a GitLab, GitHub, particularly to now run our tests not locally but on a CI/CD server that allow us to provide that give us the confidence that our tests, the tests that we wrote, actually work as expected, at least in this environment. When we using now GitHub, and specifically by defining is the workflow in GitHub Actions, which is the way of how you can define now some of these components of the CI/CD process, whether it's the build or test, okay, and how now this process of defining all of this series of steps to actually make sure that your code works as expected, and when it comes to deploy that, that make your code work as expected during development, as well as to production. Okay, So this is now called as the CI/CD process: continuous integration, continuous delivery. So the way how we define is this particularly checks or steps is using workflow. Now GitHub provides us this particular workflow where we can define is a list of jobs based on an events that it can be from the GitHub or a schedule, or defining also is if you want to set up if you want to trigger a webhook, all right, so you can actually define some events by sending an HTTP post to an API, okay. And these kind of jobs, well, are just bash scripts or GitHub Actions, which is just recurring task for complex problems that happens over and over and over, like setting up a authentication workflow for all of these vendor providers, or set up a correct tool chain for your build environments, or clone a repo into your runner, which is the environment that Git provide to you as a way to now run all of your tests. So we also look at that. How can we describe this particularly workflows? All right, and then by the time that we want this to run this, okay, to also discover what are the most common use case for defining is your workflow, whether it's you on every deploy you want to on every deploy you want, or on every release, I mean on every deploy you want to now put the release tag, all right, or you want for describing how your UI, again, for example, yeah, this is just to describe is what are the most common use case for GitHub Actions, right? One of them is to, well, building and testing your app on any peer, or on every deployment to production, put a release tag, or on every issue created, you assign a label to that, right? Another useful is if you have a SaaS and an open source project, you want this to bump anytime you want to bump up the npm versions of your open source. You can now have a particular GitHub Actions to actually now send those changes or publish your changes to the npm registry, right? Very nice little things that you can do. So as I look at this, we went to also explore that anytime you are responsible to set some sort of permissions about, hey, who can actually merge this branch, how many people do we need to do some code review, and all that kind of stuff. So this is entered now in the realm of the security and compliance. Again, because that's something that is quite long to describe here. That's what I put here. Security and compliance in 2025. The TLDR is that in security we have, previously we have now the castle mode, and now we have is the SASE. Despite that it might sound quite spicy, but castle mode, it was a model that assumed that the risk can happen only outside of that application, the system. But once the attackers get in, he can now steal credentials, inject or malware, or exploit some security vulnerabilities. or perform some reverse engineering attacks. But now they garnered this multinational American this American multinational IT consulting firm. One of their analysts, they come out with this particularly uh, architecture because now companies they want this to have they want to have security built in, not as a layer. So they come out with this and say, hey, you know what? All right. So this SASE model, this which stands for Secure Access Service Edge, is now a combination between the network connectivity and network security, right? So these two concepts that the techniques that SASE model is built upon that is the zero trust policy model, where the principles are uh, continuous monitoring and verifications, device monitoring, principle of least privilege, the microsegmentation to prevent lateral movement, and this thing called as multi-factor authentication, right? Which is commonly known as we commonly use is the 2FA. All right. So this is one of the principles that stand this particular technique of the SASE. So you have the zero trust model. The other is secure web gateway. Secure web gateway, exactly. Where the idea here is that, hey, they also follow some principles like URL filtering, where they say, hey, is this user can get into this resource? If it is, so let me now inspect their package. So it's going to do some package analysis there. So you're gonna decrypt the package, inspect that for any virus or malware on the database, and if everything went well, all right, encrypt that and send over. And also is the another techniques that SASE is built on is the CASB, this cloud access service broker. What does it mean? This is now they're going to provide some sort of service, pretty much like a physical security firm. What they give to you is the foot patrol, surveillance, verification, and that kind of stuff. All right, and similar here, but they're gonna provide you some sort of services that the goal of the principle is data security, threat protection, visibility, and compliance. We're going to talk about the compliance later on. And another technique that is used is the how do you call it? Is the one as a service, which is a very interesting concept, or software as a one as a service, which is, hey, this piece of software is going to be run locally. It's going to be run in this network, right? And some next generation firewall as well. This is just to describe this principles or techniques that now SASE stands on, all right? Or that all of these techniques that stand on or stop is on top of this SASE, or that is the component that makes SASE now what it is. Okay, and with the rise of now cloud computing, which is way much more convenient for a lot of companies to actually put their resource there, that's what they need. Need now security as a top priority, and also that the not only the security, okay, uh, but also is uh, the compliance that this company needs to follow, which is, well, most common compliance here is dive deep into the global compliance. So, for example, ISO 9001 for quality management services, ISO 14001 for environment management services, the uh, information security management system, like the ISO IEC 27001. This set of regulations, all of these come from the ISO, the International Standard Organization. All right, and some of those are more North American appliance, and therefore whatever company actually make business with the U.S. So, for example, like the FedRAM, which is the Federal Risk Authority management program, the SOC 2, security organizational system. That's what the SOC stands for, right? System Organizations Control, exactly, which is this auditing conducted by people certificate from the IACPA, which is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountant. That's a very interesting segue, by the way. And then we also have now, for example, the DSS, or the PCI DSS, which is the Payment Card Industry Data System Service. It's a PCI DDS, right? This is another compliance, especially for the payment card industry. Data security standards, and thanks for that exists, because this is very, very brittle, right? This is very, very, very brittle. Yeah, it's very, very, very brittle. Very, very, very brittle. Anyway, but again, I just mentioned it's just the common compliance. Another is the GDPR. This is General Data Protection Right on the EU. The other is the CCPA, which is California Consumer Privacy Act. This describe is now what are the data that is going to be collected by businesses and how they're going to use. Then you have now the Consumer Privacy Right Acts, which is now enforced. It's more a strict set of regulation in terms of how the data and now business collect this data, and they are now an agency that keep track and do this kind of work. And to me, it's like, okay, yeah. That's why when I hear about the word, when I hear about that Naval Ravikant mentioned high agency, individuals with high agency actually going to get at some point what they need or what they're looking for, right? And high agency means that someone that have the capability of act quickly, you know, take actions quickly. I will argue that is that. It's gonna check that. It is safe to assume that high agency means an individual capable, an individual or organization capable to act fast to make choice, take actions and influence over outcome effectively. Well, is capable to act fast or to take action, exactly, is to take action and influence outcomes effectively. So while acting quickly can be a component of the high agency, the concept encompasses much more than just speed. Here's a breakdown here. Like this. So it is safe to assume the high agency means an individual or organization capable to make this exactly make choices, take actions, and influence outcomes effectively. Take actions, to get a desired outcome effectively. Okay, it's like, hey, I'm capable of taking, I'm capable of making action. I'm capable of I'm capable to make choice, take actions, and get a desired outcomes effectively. But it's all about choices, actions, and outcomes. Choice, actions, and outcomes. So this choice, action, and outcomes, again, is because we were talking about agencies and how now the CPRA actually create now an agency for that. So now this is one of the reasons why I'm actually recording this series of videos. All right. So finally, we reached to component testing. The TFDR of this is that we want is to now guarantee that UI development work as expected. So the main purpose of, especially UI testing. So with the component testing, we want to guarantee that we want to get the confidence that the UI development work as expected without having to spin up a without having to spin up a dev, without having to spin up without having to get a full without having to get a full browser driven integration. And in other words is without having to now simulate this browser, and anytime we run a test, we need to start up a browser from scratch and then actually make sure that this works as expected. The value proposition of tests is that we can continuously guarantee that things don't break. We can guarantee that things don't break behind our backs. And this is the core things of all of this. This is the core thing of all of these tests. Whether it's unit tests, component tests, end-to-end, we want to make sure that so we give us the confidence that this test, or give us the confidence that this give us continuously confident that things don't break behind our back. That's the value proposition of this about tests. But it's that. It's like, hey, we can have now the confidence that we can continuously have the confidence that things don't break behind our back. So you can use here like in any particular example that you like to. So for example, it can be in a motorcycles or a fridge, or even yourself when you hit the gym, that kind of stuff, or repairing something, or even also in the business aspect. But this is quite interesting to take a look at this and dive deep into this concept. And remember, like any high agency, well, you make decisions. So you make decisions and you act accordingly to get a desired outcomes, right? Okay, so component testing. So we went through how can we now speed up here this component testing, and what are the things needed to do that, because we need to actually instead of spin up a browser from the scratch, only an environment, a very lightweight environment. That's what we have now, the GS DOM, or recently this thing called Happy DOM. So this is the environment where you're going to mount all of your components into the DOM. In other words, into this document. So because of that, we can now make our life much more easy to use a particular library that offer a nice little wrappers about what are the common things that we need to do to test our components, which is querying and providing a user interactions too. Okay, so for that, and that was very, very interesting to me. I really appreciate it and really love it, because we were able to not only do that with our React components, okay, but understand what is the value proposition that this is actually provide us, and also similar to the expectations, right? And how now this testing library, because after all is using now Jest to run some assertions, it also provides now some nice little wrappers around our expectations to make our tests much more meaningful, especially when it throw errors. So let's get into here, my friend, way to run this particular test. Okay, because I think this is something that it'll be very, very valuable for us. So so this is now our component here. You have now the item component here, like it is. As you can see, this one, right? And no, we are not counter. My bad. Well, this is the kind of test that we use here, especially with our tests. And then why we actually creating is this render utility here under the setup. Okay. Yes, under our setup, and how we import that here. The utilities, and if you take a look at the vite-config, you say, hey, let me actually include now the set of files here. So let me actually include now the set of file, which will be under the test.setup. Okay, and you are now telling, hey, what will be is the environment that you're gonna run, whether it's on our test, TSS or simple TypeScript components. The coverage is something that we're gonna see that later on. Okay, but for our case, this is what we care about, right? We got the globals, we got the set of files, path resolve, okay, and also is to resolve this. This is some of the configuration that we pass to the resolve here, as well as our tests. and how now in our setup here, we not only import that as well as the matchers, but also is the utilities that we add in our test. Why this is important, you may wonder. This is important because first we also look at how can we extract now the type of a argument, okay, or a parameter. We look at how can we extract is the type of as a way to now, I don't know what is this, what is the shape of this, I just wanted to make use, I want to reuse that and put it here onto my option, in the render options. And we make this, all right, this nice little utility functions to actually is encapsulate is, or to wrap this with the particular methods that the testing library provides to query our data, and also with the interactivities needed to actually run this particular test. And that is with the user events here, right? So now this particular object is not exposing, is not only the query that we can take a look at, and also the common interactions that we need to in order to make sure that this component will work similar as our end users should expect, right? So this, for example, simulating the key up, it means that you need to key down and then key up, right? So this kind of stuff that is needed to check that, as well as a scroll or on click or typing, right? So this is something that it provides for us, as well as the expectation for that, or this way of how you can now extend the expectation to actually make your life much more easy. So let's go into now enough talk, and actually let's get into this. Let's get into our test here. Where in the F is this? Package list test. There you got it, right? So okay, the TLDR is that anytime you receive a ticket, and this ticket say, hey, I would like you to now is run this, or to do this stuff for me, right? So based on based on these particular tickets, okay, let's say you create your component and then you write your test for that to make sure that everything works as expected, and to have this continuously, at least for companies or for enterprise, to have this continuously to be confident, to have this continuously confident when you're shipping your code, that not only works as expected, but it won't break behind your back, right? So because of that, we have now the render screen and that kind of stuff. And here let's gonna go with this. Has an input field for a new item. This is when we say, hey, render, and I would like to actually get is the techniques that are needed to packaging list, okay, this particular component, and we want to see is that, hey, has an input field for new items. So let's go to check is now, just gonna get that element here. One way to get that element is if you do that, get by text, okay. So for example here, you say, hey, has an input field for a new item. Has an input field for a new item. What does it mean this? Has an input field for a new item. Wait, what? Has an input field for a new item. So you say, has an input field for a new item. Or it'll be is with a new item, right? So anytime if you have this input item here by default, the only thing you want to do is to say, hey, which is the input here, right? And then you gotta dispatch this. And then you have now the set editing, dispatch here, remove and editing. And on the package list, the index here is this one. You have the frame, the header, and the section here that it shows is frame, but you say here that is item list. Okay, and this is when you're gonna show this. All right. Oh, new item. This component. Jesus. Okay. new items. Okay. This is when you're gonna check out this, right? So you wanna check out this. You say, hey, add new item here. You wanna check if this has a add new item button here, right? Setup here. Let's go to close this, as well as this, as well as this, and all of this other stuff that we don't need to, or they're not relevant to. No, packaging list. There you got it. And here you say, hey, has an input field for a new item. So once you mount this, you're gonna see is you have now the input field for a new item, which is the new item. And that's to me is quite interesting, this, because I don't new item here, but this is how you get by text or get by label text. But this is if you now take a look at your component and you understand that. For example, new item. You say, hey, new item name. Oh, if you use a label here in your, okay, makes a lot of sense. You say, hey, get by label, get by label text, new item, right? So here what you're saying is that, hey, this component that I mount into this Node.js instance, I want to make sure that you query this locally with this helper function with the method get label by text. If you find any label here, I want you to now use this as expected, right? New item name. Okay. So so far so good, right? You can also put some expectations here, but in any case, it actually is going to check if the element exists, right? So far so good. The other is that has an add new item button that is disabled when the input is empty, right? So what you're gonna do is to say, hey, let's go to now mount this component here, say packaging list. Okay, so once I mount this component, you say, all right, it is time for us to check the add new item button that is disabled when the input is empty. Okay, so we can say, all right, for this I want to get now is the user interactions. Okay, and then do something like that. You say, hey, I want to type something here in this input. Okay, which is the input I don't have then. So let me now define is the setup thing here. You say, hey, this will be input element. All right, we can query that using the screen dot get. This is when things started to get quite interesting, right? You can say, hey, I want to get that, get by text. Okay, you can say get by text or new item input, get by label text. Interesting. As long as you follow that approach, that'll be. Okay. You say, hey, I want to get by text this, get by label text, which is the input here, new item input, item input, and that is new what the fuck you think you're doing? Come on. How can I navigate between tabs here? No. Control back and forward. But this is to the left editor. But it's exactly this is you want to put them into a new div. But what if I want to now navigate through the okay. Okay. Anyway, solved. Okay, so here is how we do this. You say, hey, these new items here, new item name, you get is now is the input from this, which to me is quite interesting. And you say, hey, has an add new item button that is disabled when the input is empty, has a new item, has a add new item button that is disabled when the input is empty. And to me this is quite interesting because you're using a form and then you say this, okay, get labeled by text, new item name. What is this thing is doing? Let's get into this. Screen dot debug input element. By the time you run this, Okay, so by the time you run this here, and then you say list npm run this, but in this case, no, it's a test. npm test counter.exercise.test, no, is in fact is the packaging list. Packaging list dot test dot tsx. Okay, so now it's running this, and it say, hey, that's a great, because of course now I decided to put this here. All right, and I want to actually show this. Oh, this actually get the input, bro. That is pretty fucked up, bro. Again, this works. Get labeled by text. Oh my god. Get labeled by text. Jesus. This will search for a label that match the given text match, then find the element associated with that label. The example below will find the input no for the following DOM instruction. Exactly. As long as you're in a form, it's gonna give you the input for that. That's powerful. But as long as you follow this structure, okay, this is the way how you can get these input elements with this particular setup, with this particular way of organizing stuff. If you have a label and follow an input that match the name, good. HTML4 new item name, and the ID is new item name, but as long as it followed that particular convention. Exactly. For user input and ID user input. Very, very, very interesting. And what is important to actually do is your work. To get into the weeds, to actually get real life experience. And when the time you need to solve the problem, this is it. Oh, right, because it's using HTML4 for that, and then it's combining, and then it's binding to the ID. Oh, right, that's something interesting. So you get the input here, as well as you want to get the button here, okay, with a screen dot get by role, and here you say, hey, this will be a button that sits here with the name of this button here. When I mount this component, it'll be is add new item here. It'll be add new item. Add new item. And not only that, this actually work. And no matter if you have that, it actually do this matching for that. Oh my god. So get by role is another very interesting stuff here, because get by role, alright, say, hey, you provide me the role, okay? If you're using a screen, then skip the container argument, alright? You provide me now the screen, it's followed by the role here, and then you say, alright, this will be the options here, you know? This will be the options here. And you say name. It's gonna do a text match. It's gonna do a text match, because this text match is actually using as a regular expression. Most of the query API takes text match as an argument, which means the argument can be either a string regex or a function of signature. That's a very, very interesting. Very, 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 very interesting. Interesting. Button has a button role without explicitly setting the role attribute. Here you can see the table of this. So, all right, okay. All right, this is the way how we can now get this particular button here, and then you say has a new item button that is disabled when the input is empty. Okay, so you can make sure here to say, hey, I expect that when I mount this component, initially, okay, so by the time that I mount this component, initially, again, do one expectation here, not multiple expectation, no, only one, bro. Only one. So on the user here, I want to now is type. Okay, so type here with the element that is the input element followed by a text, which is adding a new item, which is an iMac iPad, all right, or an iMac, iMac, right? You can say it's iPhone 15, right? And by the time I input here, because this is now an async operation, so I need to wait for do that. Exactly. So I need to wait for do that. And one of the great things of this is that, look at this, is that this await behind the scenes, because we look at generators, which is a very interesting concept. What is indicating to this function is to say, hey, by the time you now find this keyword, okay, stop the execution, call this, okay, and when this now return, when the promise is resolved, now resume and get into this function. So in other words, what it's doing is, by the time that this function is evaluating and find the await keyword, it will pause the execution of this function, freeze everything that is here, and pass control to now the promise here, which is this, pass control to the promise. And by the time that that is resolved, on the dot then subscribe, on the dot then event listener, you can call it that, now is in there, that is going to now call the iterator, or call is the function to get into to resume the function execution, but now with the data, right? And that's interesting, powerful in how the things work. Oh my God, this is also liberating, very liberating, very, very liberating. So by the time that this is done, I will expect now, okay, so it has an add new items button that is disappear when the input is empty. I will like to also is to wait for this user dot the user dot click on the bottom element, okay, and I expect, all right, I expect to the bottom element here has an add new item button that is disabled when the input is empty. Oh, when the input is empty, exactly. So if the input is empty, okay, has an add new item button that is disabled when the input is empty. So what I want to do here is user type nothing, all right? And I expect that the bottom element to be disabled. That's beautiful, bro. That's beautiful, bro. And it failed because it said, hey, await user type expected keyword but found this. Expected key descriptor but found in it say here await user type of the input element followed by the out unless I have to pass something else. Expected key descriptor but found empty in empty. Okay. Receive element is not disabled. Another thing is that initially you assume that is that, you know, that button is disabled for that initially. Has an add new item button that is disabled when the input is empty. All right, so far so good. The other is enable the add new item, enables the add new item button when when there is a text in the input field. Okay, so now we can actually write this.
So the big difference between fire event and the user.
Okay, so I expect that the input element to have I expect the input element to have value empty here, right? And to be disabled here. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And another test is say, hey, enables the add items button when there is a text in the input field. Pretty much like what we have done before, okay? And that is because we have already have this wrapper render of the packaging list component, and we now create this utility function that is not only going to expose the query methods, but also the user interactions that we can that locally that the testing library is exposing for us. Okay, here we're actually going to do quite the same here, but in this case to actually use the screen to query the element by saying, hey, if we want to query an input that follow that particular form, the label HTML4 and the ID match, this is how you get an input in a form. That's interesting. So get by and this also promote is this best practice when it comes to write this particular code as expected. So get by label text, all right. So I want you to match this call new item name, okay, which will be the label text that we want to now tell JavaScript, please make this input that you query available and store this in a variable called input element, right? As it is. And I want you to actually get the button here, screen dot get by role in this case of the bottom. Interesting. Again, we're looking for the most common operations here. With the role that has the name is the add new items. What you're gonna do is to check if this contains the name of that bottom. All right. And then JavaScript, please, I want you to now store that in a variable called bottom element, right? Bottom element. So good. So by the time we have this, it is for us to actually type something and check if the button is enabled. So it's going to now actually access to the interactions by user type here with the input element, and now this will be the text here. Say, hey, MacBook Pro. So MacBook Pro, right? And once you type this, because this is an async operation, you have to wait for that. It's not synchronous, so it's going to wait for that, and well, actually check our expectations or assertion. You say, hey, expect that this element, which is the bottom element, to not to be disabled, right? Straightforward. So by the time we run this test, without the to do here, we get is this, and we already passed that test. So as you can see, things are starting to be very interesting and pretty straightforward as well. You know, or to be enabled is another one, not to be disabled, or to be enabled is another method. And then you got here, add some new items to unpack item lists when they're clicking add item. Let's get into this.
What is the correct way to wait for an element to be rendered?
So then we want to see that it's adding that item to the list. And here is where we get into a philosophical thing, which is this test is done in a and if I before I was like, yeah, if you just had one test and like went through the entire flow, that would really work. Except that if I had done that, I would not have found that this test was flawed. This test, when I wrote it, I did not aspire to write a flawed test, right? I aspired to write a test to teach you something, and then I found out later it was flawed, and I kept it flawed because then there was something more important to talk about based on that flaw. So we will do it, and like I
Oh,
Copy paste
son of a.
stuff. So await
Add new items to the unpack item list.
item.
Mm. Mm. Add a new item to an unpack item list.
Let's grab like
When clicking, oh my god, you are now working here is with the state here.
is that button. Click it. It's gonna load. All right, look. Boom. And then we can expect that these are my checkboxes because I'm a good person. I wasn't misleading. And labels text checkbox.
So you can actually get that in my label text. Okay. To actually check now if add a new items to the unpackaged item list. Okay. Add a new item to unpackaged item list. Okay.
Boom.
Add a new. Oh, I get it. I get it, man. You are now adding as an item to a list. You want to check if that. Okay. Look at this. Add a new item to the unpacked item list. When they clicking add new event. Okay. So you're gonna check is now is this item is on the other side of the DOM or the portion, the part of the DOM here. Let's get into this. Okay. So one way you can do this is to say, hey, when I add an element here, so I type an element, I type in the input, and then I add that element, okay, adds a new item to the unpack list items. And then what you can do is to search from this, search from the rendering list, all right, the section where you're rendering all of this list, and yeah, the section when you're rendering all of this list, and check if that is on the unpack section here. This is on the DOM. This is on the DOM. This is checking the DOM instead of checking the this is checking the DOM instead of checking the state here.
And then we can expect.
let me actually write this because ads will be very, very interesting. Again, because we already defined is our render wrapper that it will contain is now the render list. Okay. And also it's going to expose the nice convenient features like the user interactions. Okay. Now pretty much is the same when you want to get an element by input or by button, okay, which is most of the time what we do by saying hey, I want to now is on the package list that I don't know how is the shape of this. Let me take a look at the index. All right. No, this is the counter index in the packaging list. As you can see, we got now the new item. All right. And then we have two sections here, the unpackage and package, right? So we have now two ways to actually check these elements for that, which is, okay, makes a lot of sense. Which is this. You say, hey, because I want to check is by the time that I add a new item here, I want to see if that is on the unpack here. But I want to see if that now is on this particular element here, on this particular sections here, on this particular components as it is. So let's get into this. So first we need to actually is get the input, get the button, as well as get the packaging list. All right, to see if that element actually is there. But so one way to query for those elements is using the screen, which is a very nice little wrapper function that comes from the the testing libraries. Okay, I also is exporting. Wait, what? The utility. I also is exporting everything here from that. All right, which is the testing library in React. Okay, so screen say, hey, this is screen what I want to get by label text as follows, as long as they follow is this specific format, the label with the HTML4 in the case of React, or 4 that now identify is the ID of that input. Okay, in this case is the on the new item, which is this one, new item name. I want to get the input. Son of a. I want to get the input here, right? And also I want to get is the I want to get the input, and please JavaScript reserve this for me in memory. Okay, put this in place in memory with this identifier, which is Jesus, naming things, input element. Okay, we're gonna do the same for now the button, get by role. Okay, because you can get this based on the role, that it can be an anchor or a button. And so you say a button here, and then you say the name of this. You can match this by string, which is a great thing if you think about it. You say, hey, I want you to match this by this, right? By this string. Hey, match this string. And please JavaScript reserve space in memory with this identifier called button element. Cons as it is. All right, good. So not only that, I also wanted to screen get by text in this case. Okay, get by text, get by test. All right, something that actually match is this on the item here, on the this is the item. What is the, there you got it, something that match this unpack items. And these unpack items here is something that is gonna be show here. Okay, you're gonna show is now this unpack items as a text. All right, and then you say, hey, unpack items elements. Okay, screen get by text, and this will give you now an HTML element. And please JavaScript again, I want to now assign this to, please reserve this in memory for me with this identifier. That'll be is the unpack list element, right? Unpack list element, right? All right, so by the time I type something here, user.type and pass the input here, input, right? Input element here, with this text, you say, hey, MacBook Pro, all right, and I wait for that, and then right after that, I want to now is click. Remember, we're clicking on the entire component section package list. Okay, I want to click on this bottom element, and I need to wait for that. So I'll wait for that, right? So we say, hey, let's now is check is that element has been added to that. How so? By saying this screen unpack items, and I want to see if that element has been added to that. Which is, I want to now find that HTML label here. All right. I want to now find that HTML label here. I want to find out that HTML element here. Okay, but you time you click here, you say, hey, I want to get that now MacBook Pro here. You know, you say, hey, let's go to a wait for, or in this case, it's going to see, hey, I expect that that instead of unpackaged element, you say the unpack item element here exists. All right, but you have to do that after you add this by saying MacBook Pro, right? And to see if that exists, so I'll say unpack item element here dot I want to see if that exists. So to be in the document. So you can run this, and then you say, hey, I failed this. Why is that? Error expected as, but found in where? Packaging list, DSX, line 3. Come on, who the fucking hell? Okay. And now this, no, it's not. Now showtime. It fails because it say, hey, here, ignore node. This could be because this is a broken up in multiple elements. Unable to find an element with the text MacBook Pro. Right? This could be because of the text is broken up in multiple elements. But in this case, this text is not broken into multiple elements. No, this is not. It's just only into one H2 here, like that. But as you can see here, once you add that on the unpack items, we got now the MacBook Pro. Oh, it's because it's by label. Oh, okay. It's by the time you add that, you have that. You can say, hey, get by text label. You say by get by, but this will get is the input. Get by label text. And if you run this, it say, hey, unable to find a label with the text of MacBook Pro. Let's get into this. Get label by text. After you add that, all right. In this case, this is the add new button. Input element, they say add new button here, and by the time it's that, I want to now get that label for that, you know. And then you say not to be checked. And in my case is mm-hmm. Not to be checked. This not to be checked is so add a new items to be unpacked list. Add a new items to be on unpack item list when they click in add new items here. It's like, hey, I want you to know this input get by label text not to be checked. It's not to be checked. It has set an input. It has set an input of a type checkbox or radio element with a role of radio with a valid area check attribute true or false. Exactly. It's like, what are you doing here? It's like, exactly. The element is in there. But again, if you put is this iPhone, oh, it seems that this particular test, they share that context. That's not a good idea, bro. They share the context. Oh crap! By the time they run this particular test, you are adding is by the time you are doing that is because
No, I just like got close to the script and added it. You know what? This is more recent. I just got oh, look, it fails. Which is weird because all I did was copy paste the same test and it totally passed. Right? This is what we talk about when we get by as well. We got get by
test isolation and test scope.
it says which is nice to get to see in Redux because oh look, we found multiple elements in the text not encoded yet. Here are two elements encoded already. But like why? How'd that happen? I don't understand. Is that not clearly then like you're saying I skipped this LS? At like before the test is before the test is running two tests should not kill each other, right?
Completely.
This is one of those things where like it is very easy to be like, you know what, I'm just gonna ignore these tests entirely, right? Ignore the cases. Which I see that as which I see like just taking the liberty of being weak, right? So I need code processing and code actions and test movement, but like there are ways to test like, hey, this is a file with all the inputs. I might, if I didn't have to like stand up here in front of you all every move, I might be able to run these tests. Let's make this one more test. Here's how. So the goal is effectively to say, let's say,
So they are not in isolation, man.
string dot
The test reader verify items that are added to the unpacked items list. When the add new item button is clicked, testing the removal of item is also included in this lesson.
wait. There's only one way to use this test. You just have to run different text, remove, wait for the click, remove item. This well, it's like this test is also good because it still blows up for the same reason. And when it gets past, we can add it again. So the problem here is that I don't have tests, which is tricky because like you can't render everyone brand new every time. It also crashes every time.
So I don't have any ties isolation here. So test isolation. Hmm. Test isolation. Yeah, test isolation. Hmm. Before each, you want us to actually run this, and then this, and then this. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. 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 It's because we don't have. It's because we don't have. It's because we don't have test isolation per file, man. Oh crap! That's a that's huge. That's pretty bad.
Cool. Let's answer that question first, and then we'll talk about decision trees. Your question was, what if it's not a communicator type, right? So here's the answer. What if there's an estimation? What if there's something that has to happen, right? You have a bunch of options in this case. Won't solve my problem now, but you do have a bunch of options. So if you do need to wait for something, your best bet is to use something called.
Okay. I get it. What the issue is this?
With them, it's about to be implemented. So
Hmm.
wait for, which is getting so we have a wait for. So beyond that, we're gonna wait for. It'll basically, all right. Like this expectation should pass eventually, and then like if we wanted to render these themselves, basically resolve the promise, and we call that function resolve, right? And then like reject the promise after a certain point, right? You could render yourself. You don't have to. This is like okay. So again, this like this came from me was writing a test like, oh yeah, let's do that. That's a long time out on this topic, but I noticed that this doesn't work. And I noticed that only one test isolation is able to handle this, which is like weird because like you just don't use the app and it does that, right? But if I do like a, we saw the failing test, which is still good to like choose to like see some all screen that debug does is it passes along some silly mathematical formula, right? So one, I'll get into it as well. You can see it at any point. And if I squint, you can see that I do, in fact, have two macro pros on. That's why the test passed with iPad Pro, and it failed with Mac Pro. Let's hit Pro. Yes, it gives you some two macro pros. Some version of that with Mac accidentally showed it. Um, we have to import it. So this kind of leads us into a big issue. That render does, in fact, render a grand now with Mac Pro. Render that grand, right? The issue is that an implementation detail for this app is when we look through it, it's that let's go say let's set this as a beginner point. You can see that I the store is re-rendering this. And so we're re-rendering the component, but the store in Redux at least is defined just like already defined outside of Redux, which is like the feature of Redux, right? Which is this idea that like it lives outside of it, it's a global state that you can manage. The context API, if it was in your component, would re-render. You would not have this issue, right? If you stay, you would not have this issue. It is only the fact that in closure scope, the store exists now. It doesn't matter how many times we render or re-render that component. This like variable is still there, right? And it has two macro pros in it. And so when we re-render the DOM and it goes to talk to the Redux store, it's like, I got you two macro pros, to which our get selector is like, yo, I'm only looking for one and blow up line two, right? And we have an issue unique to our test. And this creates a like philosophical moral quandary for us. Not really the right answer, but we're tired of existing in something along those lines. We don't want to have parallel clause. We want to do testing. We want to get this in code outside of React component. That render does, in fact, render a grand now. Right? The issue is that that's not the store. The implementation detail for this app is when we look through it, it's that let's go, let's say let's have TSX as a beginning point. You can see that I the store is re-rendering this. And so we're re-rendering the component, but the store, in Redux at least, is defined just like this idea of a component outside of React component, which is like the feature of Redux, right? Which is this idea that like it lives outside of it, it's a global state that you can manage. The context API, if it was in your component, would re-render. You would not have this issue, right? You state you would not have this issue. It is only the fact that in closure scope, the store exists now. It doesn't matter how many times we render or re-render that component. This like variable is still there, right? And it has two macro pros in it. And so when we re-render the DOM and it goes to talk to the Redux store, it's like, I got you two macro pros. To which our get selector is like, yo, I'm only looking for one and blow up line two, right? And we have
But it's because by the time it runs this, it's running this particular code because you already wrapped. Okay, it's because you already wrapped this with the provider by using this Redux toolkit to actually do that. And by the time you do that, you say, "Hey, no, I get this element here." Okay. Oh, crap. Oh, crap. Okay. So it's because it's running this. And not only is keeping those data there, but it's keeping that because behind the scenes we're using is now the store, the provider from the Redux, and that is what happening is behind the scenes. So, okay, it's because this data is stored in memory by the time we run this. Holy moly, bro! So that's why when we try to run this, it say no, I failed. Okay, I fail, but I fail is to unable to find a label with the text of MacBook Pro. But it's because it say unable to find a label at items. This is some packet glitch, and as you can see, it actually add this. Of course, the label that was here was toggle 1, right? But it add this MacBook Pro because behind the scenes we are now updating is the state of our applications, and therefore that is reserved in memory, and that's why we look at this, and that's what it throw this particular error. Oh my god. Oh crap. Okay. But it's because of this particular error.
And this creates a like philosophical view of like documents, not really, right? But
So
those lines.
the way how you can fix this is by creating is a new setup, um, a new setup on every test here.
Think about this. We could
Holy moly.
like mock out like these specific to like make it so that start like mocking out the world in order to like in service of our test, right? The more you mock out, the further you are from reality. While that can occasionally be fun, it is probably one of those things where, as some people, most code bases are designed to be a series of relatively reasonable hacks, shortcuts, things that are like, I gotta get my job done, ain't no big deal. Over time, add up to more and more so stubbing everything out or mocking out like Redux or something along those lines to try to like grab the use level that can like do code things to it. Probably not great.
Okay.
From reality, start like mocking out the world in order to be like in service of our test. Right? The more you mock out, the further you are.
Okay. So, test isolation. This is a very interesting topic here. Test isolation. Because anytime we run a test, and since we are now, because anytime we run a test, because anytime we test our React components, sometimes we got is because anytime we test our React components, sometimes we got is a we got some sort of global or app level state, right? Using Redux, it means exactly. It means that when when we are running our tests, exactly. It means that when we are running our tests, our UI tests, it means that mhm, it means that when we're running our UI tests, we need we need to make sure that we get a fresh start. That's fucking we get a fresh start by creating a setup function, mhm, for our test. Jesus fucking Christ. Instead to have more and more and more and more and more problems along the way. Mm-hmm. And this is important. So most code bases started to falling apart. Most code bases starting. So most code bases started to falling apart when a more reasonable hacks most code bases starting to falling apart through a series, and this is the reason why actually I looking at this particular course from this leaders in the industry. So Brian Holt, Steve Keeney, Kyle Simpson, and Will Sentence, because it's based on their pain points. They come up with some solution to this, and then they passing me the torch to then later on figuring out, hey, you will find out, you will face some challenge. You will go alone into the darkness. So you better be ready. Okay. So most code bases started to fall in through a series of reasonable, 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 okay, reasonable, mm-hmm, hacks and shortcuts. So most code bases started to falling apart. Mm-hmm. Most code bases started to falling apart through a series of reasonable hacks and things that make work through a through a relatively series of reasonable hacks and shortcuts. Things to get your job done. Over time, it adds up. Exactly. Over time, is add up. Is add up. Over time, this add ups and end up and end up and end up in a point where you don't trust anything there. And that's the reality for most code bases. Most code bases start to falling start falling start falling no start falling apart. Exactly, most code bases start falling apart. Okay, most code bases start falling apart through a relatively series of reasonable hacks and shortcuts, things to get your job done, and over time it adds up. Okay, it adds up and ends up in a point where you don't trust any there.
Things that are like, yeah, I gotta get my job done, ain't no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So, stubbing everything out or mocking out like Redux or something along those lines to try to like grab the new selected method and do things to it, probably not great.
Okay, so mocking Redux or any mocking Redux or so too much mocking Redux or anything else is probably not great. Okay.
Like it would work, but like over time, just makes it less useful. Other things I could do are like try to like hack at my performance in a way that just tries to like outperform the test, which is not great. Third thing that I could do is use this as a learning opportunity to realize that like my application is not great. Third thing that I could do performance in a way that just tries to like outperform the test, which is not great. Third thing that I could just makes your test suite meaningless.
Exactly. Make your test suite worthless. Hmm.
Other things that I could do are like try to like hack at my performance in a way that just tries to like outperform the test, which is not great. The third thing that I could do is use this as a learning opportunity to realize that like my architecture is not great, fix that issue, and have a happier code base, right? Because the issue right now is I don't have a great way at this moment to separate the idea that Redux is involved from its performance, right? Like the idea of the component
Exactly.
using wraps
It's
together
wrapper here.
underscore underscore closure script. And like for my test, that's how it manifests itself, right? It's, you know, when we talk about outage, it's the opposite when I like revisit, which is why I'm kind of making a video right now, which is like in a large application, the chances that I might have to like lose code sometime like converge not very well, right? Like we will have those. When they're tied to each other, I find myself having a folder where it's like 3 or 4 different versions of the same piece of UI, different state manager, like parts of the state, all sorts of weird stuff that you've obviously seen in other code bases before. Maybe you've done them occasionally and felt bad about it and didn't know what else to do, right? And so we want to like when things are tightly coupled, I end up in weird situations like this. Like I'm happy a unit test found it. If a unit test did not find it, I would have found it 6 months from now. Like this is one of those things where like
Oof.
unit test will actually never find it. In a real code base, 6 months from now you will find it, and like it will be too late. You will have already had like 17 versions of it. I would use this as an excuse to kind of like be nostalgic.
So, so what we can do is to recognize that our architecture is not great, because we need to find a way to decouple the state management, in this case Redux, from our UI, from a user component, from user interface. So what can we do? All right. Well, is to export that separately. Is to separate that. Is to separately. Is to do that separate. Is to separate that export.
But like the key exposure breakpoints that, and I started by at least separating out our library. So then I can say like application with a default interval will also export the packing list. This is utilizing for like having version wrap like state management so everyone can use it, and then like if you ever just wanted to log into the UI with our past props and everything, you also have the version export default interval. A lot I originally export default interval applications like cool. So we've got that in place, and like I haven't solved the issue yet because the export still didn't on the default one. And if I just try to grab a packing list with it, let's go here. Let's go adjust the test a little bit. The one, which blows up lots of things, all of them, which is like, hey, you tried to use this map, but you don't have a provider. Like,
Exactly. Yeah, they do. I don't have a provider.
so we got that. Could we like export the provider? We could. You know what? At that point, my version.
You're going to recreate is now your
Wait, this still work with oversave, and I will just be back where I started with a slightly more modular component, like better than I started, but the same issue. So let's not get confused. So one of the cool things about React testing library is that
we can is create now this wrapper that is going to accept that. Exactly. The store is the issue, not the provider. And then you create now.
Now I have the ability to get a fresh
store.
I have not lost anything, only gained, and I gained a lot for what is formatted to be
And then you pass now create store for that. But this is quite interesting. Render with provider. But now you're gonna render it with this. But this is now when it comes to tests is with the state management, if you need to pass that. Okay.
Not true for labels, right? Which are actually not. So I can even not if you're using the same wrapper all the time. Like let's say like this is one provider.
So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.